Welcome to the Ancestral Healing Podcast, a place where we explore ancestral healing, animism, and earth-based spirituality for personal, cultural, and planetary wholeness. I'm your host, Joseph Shumway, the Ancestral Healing Coach, bringing you some magic to reclaim vibrant connection with the earth, your ancestors, and the non-human world. Hello, greetings, dear friend. I'm so grateful that you're here with me today. It has been a minute since I've recorded an episode, and it just feels like so many things have not only been going on in my personal life, but I think just the collective at large. I think we've really been experiencing a lot, and this summer season here in the Northern Hemisphere has felt really intense with a lot of moving parts and moving pieces. And I want to just name that. And if you're someone like me who's really been struggling with the weight of everything that's happening in the world right now, know that you're not alone. And also, as I've heard many folks mention recently, is know that the grief and the heartache that you feel and carry is a sign that you have not turned off your sense of compassion, that you have not checked out of the reality of what's going on, even if it feels like we can't do much about it ourselves as little old individuals sometimes. Know that your grief and the heartache that you carry is important, and we can't let go of that. And we have to continue trying to work hard in the ways that we can to make changes and to help foster more compassion, more humanity, more love, and just more healing, and allowing that energy to just build as much as we can in the earth right now through whatever actions that we have the capacity and the ability to take. I continue to be really heartbroken with everything that's going on with the dear people in Gaza. And that's one of those things that it feels like I don't know what else to do. And I know that a lot of other people feel that as well. And doing what we can do is important, and continuing to just allow ourselves to feel the grief of that is also important, so that we don't check out, that we don't lose sight of what is happening, and continuing to call out what is happening, this horrific act of supremacy and genocide that is happening, all in the name of someone wanting to take over and colonize a piece of land that they believe belongs to them. And there's a lot of complexity there, and I don't necessarily intend to get into that. I just want to name that what's happening is wrong, and what's happening is tied to a lot of the things that I want to share and talk about today in this particular episode. And there's a lot of other things going on in the world. Here in my own country, in the United States, we continue to see the rise of authoritarianism, fascism, Christian nationalism, blatant attacks on the rights of other people and human beings, and the dehumanization of those human beings. It's hard. It's hard to sit with. And there's days that I don't know if I want to stay here anymore. And yet it's like, where else am I going to go? Even though I know there's many places I could go. At the same time, many other places in the world are also experiencing other types of hardships and troubles. And so it's a global wide thing, and it's all part of the great turning that's happening right now. The old systems of supremacy are being broken down, and they're not going away quietly. And it's so important that we continue to feed the benevolent forces that are moving at the same time to counterbalance those. And it's important that we take care of ourselves, that we regulate our own nervous system, that we tend to our own wounds so that we can show up better, more powerfully, more potently in giving of our gifts as medicine to help balance out the harms that are being rendered. And what's also hard is to see other beautiful human beings acting out the harms that are being administered by these other larger systemic forces, many of whom don't even know and realize that they're carrying and acting out harms. They're acting out because they believe that's what they just have to do to survive, to protect themselves, whatever it is. And that's also harmful. And I want to name that even as we grieve and mourn the harms that are being done by other human beings, we can't dehumanize those human beings as well, because they are also acting out long held cultural troubles and harms. And that feeds into also what I want to share and talk about today in the episode. Before I dive into the episode content, however, I want to make you aware of an opportunity to dive into the work of Ancestral Lineage Healing. If the opportunity calls to you, I will be participating in guiding an in-person intensive retreat over a weekend. I'm going to be joining 5 of my other beautiful colleagues who are also Ancestral Lineage Healing practitioners in Union, Washington, in the Northwest United States, at a beautiful retreat center called the Sacred Waters. And we will be guiding a weekend retreat in helping folks learn the steps and the process of ancestral lineage healing. And it will take place starting October 30th and ending November 2nd. And it's going to be very beautiful because we're going to be doing this over the time of the Samhain event, which is also known as Halloween or All Hallows Eve. But Samhain is the time where we get to become close with the ancestral realm. There's a lot of beauty and a lot of magic that can happen. And so this retreat, this intensive, is going to take place over the Samhain time here in 2025. So starting October 30th through November 2nd, Union, Washington. I'm going to put the link to the event in the show notes. And if you're interested to check it out, take a look and see if it calls to you. And if it does, I would love for you to join us and being there present, see you in person, and to help guide you in learning the process, the steps of ancestral lineage healing work. So I'm naming that as an offering and would love you to check that out if it calls to you. So diving into the content today, when we talk about ancestral healing work, sometimes people may not really be thinking about what it is we're healing. And I think a lot of times people just think about, oh, we're healing traumas. Yes, we're healing traumas. Oh, we're healing intergenerational traumas. Yes, we're healing those. And yet, I think sometimes people may not have a real depth of understanding of what those actually entail, what's actually connected to trauma, to intergenerational trauma in particular, when it comes to ancestral healing work. And a lot of times when I'm starting out working with clients and they're coming with the intent of healing intergenerational traumas, a lot of times they're coming with a few common ones in mind. They're thinking about seeing patterns in their family systems around whether it be domestic and or sexual violence and abuse, or alcoholism or other addictions, narcissism. Those are some of the common ones that people recognize as patterns in their family system. And those are oftentimes catalysts for bringing them into ancestral healing work. And what I really want to do today is build on that idea around what people think of as the more common intergenerational traumas or patterns, and try to expound upon those, but then also understand some of the genesis behind those traumas. And so all of those things that I named are byproducts of larger cultural wounds. And we're going to get into that here in the episode. But what's also important is that there are a lot of cultural wounds that people don't recognize or think about as being intergenerational patterns and troubles that are also showing up in their family system. And this is because they become so commonplace and normalized that we don't even think about them as wounds and as byproducts of these same larger cultural harms that have been perpetuated for generations. Sometimes that people don't realize are extreme people pleasing. Okay. Women not feeling safe or empowered to speak their voice or to stand in their sovereignty. Toxic masculine behaviors showing up for men. Hoarding, greed, okay? Broken intuition, or just not being able to connect with other non-human beings. These are just some examples of other intergenerational traumas and troubles that we sometimes don't even think about or recognize because they just become so commonplace. And a really good example of that is hoarding or greed. And a lot of times in psychology or like social psychology today, it's just accepted. And the belief is that humans are just naturally greedy. And yet that stands opposed to other indigenous wisdom and traditions that believe that humans are naturally inclined to be compassionate, generous, life affirming, life giving, and creative beings. And instead, it's when we're forced to live in manufactured conditions of scarcity that over time, humans will learn to be greedy and competitive because they no longer see and recognize that they live in an abundant world and that they're actually living in a manufactured system. And so that's just one example of something that we don't recognize as a trauma or a trouble. Greed, hoarding is a byproduct of broken cultural systems and cultural wounding that then cause us to act in certain ways that are against that what I believe to be our natural state of being generous and compassionate as human beings. So cultural wounds are those that impact the collective at large. And they are systemic in nature in the sense that they're baked into structures, political, religious, whatever the institutional level is, they're built into structures that then are meant to help systemically perpetuate and maintain a set of order that is also creating harms for people. And cultures that systemically perpetuate collective wounds and traumas are what we would call broken cultures. So there's lots of different cultures on the planet. There have been lots of different cultures on the planet. Cultures have come and gone, sometimes by natural ways, sometimes by force and violence. And yet, those cultures that perpetuate collective wounds and harms, like I said, those are what we would call a broken culture. This is opposed to what we would call a healthy or an intact culture. And I want to name a couple of examples to compare and contrast healthy versus broken cultures. So, broken cultures cause humans to feel disconnected, isolated, dependent, vulnerable, and unsafe. Whereas a healthy culture creates safety and belonging by recognizing and fostering interconnectedness and interdependence within human communities and the non-human world. Another example is that broken cultures will create systems where humans have to compete for survival and belonging. And this results in bodies being constantly engaged in states of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. This kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier with greed being a result of manufactured constructs of scarcity. So broken cultures create manufactured constructs of scarcity and competition, whereas healthy cultures create systems of communal safety and belonging, and they make it easier for everyone's needs to be met. And the other example is that broken cultures produce children and youth who have unmet emotional needs. And what this results in are emotionally stunted adults who then struggle to find their gifts and their place in community. And this is a real hallmark of our broken Western culture is we have so many adults who are actually emotionally stunted children running around trying to figure out who they are and what their gifts are. And oftentimes showing up in harmful ways or just perpetuating some of those same behaviors onto their children, which results in generational patterns as well. This is in opposition to what healthy culture creates, which is emotional safety for children and instilling emotional maturity in youth, often because they have very beautiful rites of passage rituals. But what happens is that this results in helping these youth discover and step into their gifts earlier in life. They know who they are. They know what they're about with confidence, with groundedness. And this leads to emotionally mature adults who can then become wise, grounded elders to help continue nurturing the community, to help teaching youth, to help moving on information around these ways of being a healthy and intact culture to the next generation. So those are a few examples that compare healthy culture versus a broken culture. And needless to say, our Western culture, that is the dominant culture on the planet right now, is a broken culture. Western culture is a byproduct of a Judeo-Christian framework of seeing and being in the world. And I just want to name that they're very interconnected here. And what's more sad is that Western culture has touched almost every part of the globe at this point, and it's brought harm in some way or another to almost every other more ancient indigenous culture, many of whom were very healthy and many of which were completely destroyed. Many have survived, but many have survived with wounds that those cultures and those elders and those culture keepers are having to work to heal themselves with their own peoples. So Western culture has been very impactful on a global scale. And this is really important. And the mechanism through which Western culture has become such a harmful, toxic presence in the world is through colonialism. So I want to talk a little about colonialism. And a definition of colonialism that I would offer, and it's kind of my own tweaking of other definitions that are out there online, is colonialism is the practice of extending and maintaining political, social, economic, and cultural domination over a territory and its people by another people who claim superiority and who are in pursuit of extracting wealth and natural resources from that territory. So there's a lot in there. And this is not a deep dive into the topic of colonialism by any means, but I want to offer some very basic information because it's so important as we're moving into the topic of ancestral healing work. Colonialism is at the forefront because this is what we're healing a lot of times is the byproduct wounds of colonialism. And so the modern colonial era, or the European colonial era, as we could call it, really started probably in the early 1500s. That time frame is debatable depending on which historian you talk to. But the early 1500s is a really good place that we can kind of start to work from and see. And it peaked in the mid to late 1700s. The systemic harms that resulted from this era are still being perpetuated today. And that's important, even though the actual expression of that colonialist activity kind of peaked, as I mentioned, in the mid to late 1700s. It's still kind of going on. Okay, there are still countries, territories, parts of the world who are still subjected to a parent colonizing country. Okay, or there are countries who have maybe claimed independence, but who still carry the marks of those colonialist nations and forces. So it's very pervasive. And there are many old political and religious institutions that continue to maintain the systemic harms and perpetuate them. And even though I'm talking about more of this modern, quote, quote, modern colonial era, it's not modern, started in the 1500s, it's a long time ago, but it's modern in the sense that the impacts are still very visible and very much seen and recognized in our world today. However, colonialism is not a new thing. Okay, even European colonial era, it was not the first time this happened. It's been going on for a really long time. However, the modern colonial era was a byproduct of earlier colonizing activity. And the European colonizers who were acting out in the modern colonial era were responding according to old wounds rendered to their own ancestors centuries earlier by other colonizing forces. The previous primary colonizing force being the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire version 2.0, which was the Christian Roman Empire. So that's a very obvious previous colonizing force, but there are others and there have been others. And I just want to name that this activity has been going on for a really long time. In addition to colonialism, another really important harmful force that we need to talk about is capitalism. Capitalism is kind of the henchman to colonialism. I like to think of it as colonialism were Prince John from the Robin Hood story. Capitalism would be the Sheriff of Nottingham, kind of this more sinister enforcement mechanism to the bidding of the ruler. And capitalism arose out of colonialism because powerful humans learned that they could steal land from indigenous peoples, plunder all of the land's natural resources for cheap or free, and then take it back to their own lands, resell it, repackage it, whatever it was, and resell those resources for massive profits and accumulate tremendous amounts of wealth. This is capitalism. Stealing free stuff from the earth, turning it around and making a profit on it. We're not acknowledging the beingness of the lands. We're not acknowledging that there are non-human beings whose lives we're taking and impacting by extracting said resources. We're not acknowledging that those lands are stewarded and tended by other peoples before us. We just see the earth as a resource ready to be extracted and exploited. So capitalism is perhaps one of the most evident and intact structures of colonialism that we can see and witness today. And it's pervasive through all of Western culture. Even cultures that are socialist really have a lot of capitalism still underpinning a lot of their economic structures and systems. And it's metastasized humans' view, again, that the earth was this natural resource waiting to just be extracted and exploited. And it also perpetuated this idea of scarcity because it gave the impression that the person who could accumulate the most, the quickest, wins. And that's very much the case. And so we can't talk about colonialism effectively without also talking about capitalism because the two are very deeply entangled. They're very codependent on one another. And that's important when we move into understanding how to work towards dismantling these powerful structural forces. And so to understand the genesis of these codependent forces of colonialism and capitalism, we need to talk about the underlying ideologies that led to their creation in the first place. And so this is what I want to talk about next. These are what I would like to refer to as the six cultural wounds or the six cultural supremacies. They're not necessarily mine. They're named by others, including my own teacher, Dr. Daniel Foor. And these are larger ideologies. So I'm going to name them, but understanding that most of the cultural harms and troubles that we can find have genesis in these six cultural wounds. Okay, so even going back to earlier what I mentioned about people talking about intergenerational traumas and patterns of domestic violence and sexual abuse, those have a breadcrumb trail that we can follow back to one or more of these six cultural wounds. So I'm going to name these six cultural wounds and I'm going to talk about them a little bit more. And then I'm going to also put them in the show notes in case you want them as a reference as well that you can refer back to later. So the six cultural wounds or the six cultural supremacies are human supremacy, cultural supremacy, ancestral supremacy, religious and ideological supremacy, gender and sexuality supremacy, or what we could call Cis-Hetero supremacy. And then the last one is economic supremacy. So let's go back and talk about them a little bit more. Human supremacy is the first one that I want to talk about. And this is really the grandfather supremacies. It's the oldest supremacy, and all of the others are spin-offs from this one. Human supremacy is the belief that human beings are the only legitimate beings on the earth, and the belief that the earth was solely made for human beings to use at their own will and disposal. That supremacy is very old. Came about thousands of years ago for different groups of people. But as I said, it's really the grandfather supremacy. Because when humans started to believe that they were the best of all of the other beings, that then creates the positionality of a hierarchy. And hierarchy is at the heart of supremacy. So human supremacy resulted in land and earth disconnection. That is one of the original deepest wounds that we have as humans, is not being connected to and in relationship with the lands we live on, thereby being in relationship with our great goddess, Mother Earth. The second one is cultural supremacy. And this is the belief that your nation or your group of people are superior and hence justified in overtaking the cultures and lands of other peoples. So nationalism and fascism are expressions of cultural supremacy. And we're seeing that in the United States very much alive and well, never went away. It's been tampered down because one party won, and then the next party wins, and it comes back up, and now it's becoming much more prevalent because it keeps getting tamped down instead of we're not creating the pathways to address it and actually heal from it. So cultural supremacy, it's a big one. The next one is ancestral supremacy. This is believing that your ancestral or your ethnic group is superior to others. So this is really the heart of racism or white supremacy, which is our modern day most toxic form of racism or ancestral supremacy. And it doesn't have to necessarily be based on skin color, but it does have to be based on the fact that I believe that my group of people, because we descend from this person or this group of people from this place, we're better because of XYZ. Next, we have religious and ideological supremacy. And this is believing that your religious or your spiritual tradition, or even not a religious or spiritual tradition, just your way of seeing the world is superior and that it should be imposed on others. So this results in a host of traumas, religious trauma being very prominent in this particular category, but also others. We see this in the political climate of the United States and other countries as well, where it's ideologically based. My ideology is better than yours, and we all need to follow it, and I need to enforce that you do follow it. Next, moving on to cis-hetero supremacy or gender sexuality supremacy. And this results in patriarchy, which is the belief that men are superior to and in charge of women. Sexism, anti-queerness, basically believing that there are only two gender expressions, or that same-sex relationships are inferior, or that other ways of showing up as a man or a woman are inferior and sinful, wrong, name your adjective. So there's a lot there. And we see that very much alive and well. And oftentimes that one is entangled with the religious and ideological supremacy previously mentioned. And the last one that I'm going to talk about is economic supremacy. And this is believing that wealth or economic status implies a meaningful hierarchy. And this results in systemic poverty and classism. And we've seen a lot of cultural wounds around classism and around this idea of wealth needing to be in possession by a few because they are better than everyone else. So those are the 6 cultural wounds, the cultural supremacies. Again, I'll just name them real quick and I'll put them in the show notes. Human supremacy, cultural supremacy, ancestral supremacy, religious and ideological supremacy, gender, sexuality supremacy, and economic supremacy. And I want to mention that just because a person holds beliefs around these supremacies, it doesn't always have to translate into big, actual physical, harmful actions. Okay. A lot of times people hold these ideologies and beliefs. Sometimes they're consciously aware of them. Sometimes they're not. And what happens is rather than expressing those in real physical, harmful, tangible actions, they show up in more microaggressions, other subtle ways. Those can sometimes be the most dangerous because those can more quietly influence and filter into political and religious structures and policies. And so this is important because as we work to heal and we become more self-aware, we want to gently allow ourselves to start to notice and recognize these supremacies in our own ideologies and our own frameworks of how we're seeing the world, and take notice of them and be like, oh shit, that's showing up. I'm carrying that. And it's not perhaps your fault. You've inherited from deep cultural systems, but it is your responsibility when you recognize them to make some meaningful actions to heal however those showed up for you, and to start to notice how those have impacted your actions, the ways that you've shown up in the world, the ways that you've shown up for other people, or the ways that you haven't shown up for other people. This is really important part of our own self-work, is learning to recognize and identify when these are present, when these have just unconsciously been given to us because of the cultural systems and structures that I've talked about. They've just shown up for you, and yet it's your responsibility, it's our responsibility as people who are wanting to heal and become a more loving, beautiful, compassionate, creative human being to tend to these wounds when we recognize them showing up. There's been a lot of talk over the years around healing white supremacy, being anti-racist. And a lot of white-bodied folks have tuned out, have in sometimes violent, aggressive ways rejected their need to look into this. And yet, in my own healing work and experience, the ways that I have seen white supremacy being enmeshed in the way that I saw myself in context to other people has been very hard. And I've done a lot of my own work around that. And I'm still continuing to do a lot of my work around that because this is deep generational stuff. And it takes a lot of our own work to recognize them showing up in ourselves. And so I'm not sitting here as a person that's saying, I've worked through all of the 6 cultural wounds. No, I'm always finding new little things like, oh, wow, that's showing up. There it is. Like, okay. And taking note, offering some grace, offering some kindness to ourselves, and then spending time tending these cultural wounds again, bringing back in some of these counter ideologies, spending time with my ancestor guides and leaning into this. Spending time with those guides is very powerful medicine to heal these wounds that show up in ourselves, because we may not only be carrying the ideologies, we're also carrying the impacts of the wounds themselves brought about by these ideologies. And so it's important that as we're healing ourselves, we're recognizing the beliefs that created the wounds themselves. Maybe not in ourselves, but the cultural generational wounds and beliefs that then created the wounds for ourselves. If we can recognize and name them, that's the first step to then becoming someone who can help dismantle those beliefs, those ideologies, and the systems themselves that created them and perpetuate them. And so ancestral healing is about uncovering all the ways in which we personally have been affected, but also our ancestral lineages have been impacted by these larger cultural wounds. And like I said, we're naming them, and then we're starting to notice how they show up for ourselves and in our family systems. And that then creates a place from which we can start to work more effectively. We can then call in our wise, loving ancestor guides and learn from them how to heal and tend these wounds. And they have a lot of wisdom and a lot of magic, because a lot of the times the ancestor guides that we're connecting with, these ancient ones who lived in times of those beautiful, intact cultures, they know how to live more beautifully. They know how to work in being able to tend cultural wounds quickly. And that's really beautiful medicine for ourselves, because when we start to recognize and heal the wounds in ourselves, we're healing them for the other ancestors in our lineages who are also probably still entangled with those same ideologies in a disembodied state. And I've talked about them in previous episodes where there are ancestors in our lineages who still may be unwell. An unwell ancestor is someone who is still caught up and entangled in many of these harmful cultural wounds and ideological belief systems. So as we work to heal and tend them ourselves, we're kind of loosening the grip that those energies, those forces are having on our unwell dead. And we're then creating the ability for the wise, loving ancestor guides to move in and help tend and potently administer their magic and medicine to those same unwell dead. And then it creates this beautiful healed lineage and creates this channel by which we can then bring in all of the wise ancestral medicine from the ancient ones more potently into the present day and the present human consciousness. Powerful stuff. And what I also want to mention is that ancestral healing it's not just about healing yourself and your troubles, your wounds. This is not an individualistic thing, which is another colonialist wound. P.S. Individualism is a colonialist wound. So if we approach our healing as a just me, myself, and I thing, we're going to miss out. Instead, this is a collective healing process. We're healing not only ourselves, we're healing our ancestral lineage systems, and we're working to heal the collective as well. Because if we're all not well, we're all not well. And so ancestral healing is also about cultural healing. It's social justice work. It's quiet rebellion against the systems and the structures that continue to perpetuate supremacy, authoritarianism, patriarchy, transphobia, homophobia, classism, all of the things. Those are all expressions of these larger cultural wounds that when we begin healing them ourselves, we can then be better informed as to how to step out more potently into the world and to offer cultural change, systems change. This is powerful work. And we're going to all be called to do that in different ways. Some of us are going to be called to be more out there, vocal, active in protest. Some of us might be more called to more quiet ways of protest and rebellion, volunteering, making donations to organizations that are on the front lines, writing, teaching our children, teaching our community members about these ideas and concepts, and helping shift minds, shift paradigms, helping people to see and recognize that a lot of the things that they struggle with are tied to the systems and structures that want to keep them bound into these same patterns and cycles. So this is very powerful work that we're doing. When we're healing our lineage systems, we're loosening the energetic grip that colonialism has on the world and the planet at large. And we're making pathways to call in more beautiful, potent, wise, loving ancestral medicine. And that is beautiful to me. That's inspiring. And thereby allowing us to take action in whatever ways that feels right to us to help make systems changes so that more and more people can have their needs met, so that more and more people can be free to express themselves fully and to step into their own gifts, their own medicine that needs to be brought into the world. I'm really grateful that you've joined me today, and I hope that the content has been inspiring and that it inspires you to think of different ways that our collective cultural experience has been hijacked and broken by some other very harmful forces who continue to still benefit and move through the world. And yet we can take a stand against those systems. We can take a stand against those forces by beginning to heal the wounds that we're carrying for other people, and then working to make sure that we can reverberate that healing outward into the collective as it is today. Thank you for joining me. May you be well. May you have the blessings of your wise, loving ancestors to back you and support you and guide you in these times. I am confident that your wise, loving ones are working in magical ways to help guide and just gently nudge you to this part of your life, to this place, to this person, to this opportunity, so that you can find more healing, so that you can tend to the wounds that I've just named that are there and present for you and your loved ones and your ancestors. And you get to be the change maker. You get to be the one today who the ancestors are calling and reaching out to begin and continue making these changes that will have incredible impacts for your lineages, your living family members, and the collective at large. Thank you and blessings. May you be well. Thanks for listening. If you're being called to reconnect with your ancestors and begin a healing journey with them, I invite you to learn more about my work by connecting with me at ancestralhealing.coach. You can also subscribe to my free Substack, where I share writings, practices, and insights designed to help you find more healing and well-being through deeper connection and relationship with the earth and your ancestors. Until next time, sending you lots of love and vibrant magic.